Hi guys, this is Super V. Many young people are interested in my job, but like I was, they're still confused a bit about what international development finance is all about. Despite transparency being one of the ruling principles of any international public organization, despite information being all out there. So today I just want to simplify what this job is all about and without any industry jargon, explain to you in real terms what our mission is, what working in development finance is all about. Let us start with the most obvious question. Why does this field even exist? What problem is development finance supposed to solve? This part of finance didn't appear out of nowhere. It all started after the Second World War with the creation of the World Bank, which was created to help rebuild economies and prevent future instability. Over the decades, many other MDBs appear across the world, in Asia, in Africa, Latin America, all with the same one mission. Governments came together to pool financial resources to finance huge infrastructure projects that would hopefully enable economic prosperity. I'm going to explain this in a very simple formula, looking at three key dimensions: the need, the money, and its purpose. We start with the need. Imagine you're a government and you need to build a big infrastructure project, a school, a power network, a road, even an airport. These assets, these things, cost a lot of money. Let me give you an idea of how expensive. A 100-kilometer road can cost anywhere between $50 to $300 million, depending on the geographical features. A bridge, anywhere between $5 to $200 million, depending on if it's a major river crossing. An airport, a small one, can cost up to $100 million. The big real ones go into the billions. So if you're the government, what do? Where do you get the money? You could, for example, pay it from the government budget, but usually you can't pay for one big infrastructure project all at the same time, because as a government, you also need to still pay salaries for the public officer. You need to run hospitals and schools. You need to deal with emergencies all at the same time. Simply said, you need the budget you would need to spend on that infrastructure project on more immediate needs. You could also borrow from the private banks. They would give you the funds. However, the private banks might not be interested in your project because they're looking for a more immediate profit gain, or your project might involve such high risk that the private banks will ask for a very high interest rate, making the entire project very costly for the government and indirectly for the citizens. And this is a real issue, especially in developing economies. Because if you understand a bit of finance, you know that the level of interest rate applied to a loan is correlated with the level of risk, which is in a way or another coded in the country credit rating. Here's where multilateral development banks come into play. These are also development banks, like the name implies. And they are multilateral because they're not just representing one government. Many governments came together and pooled together their money, and this means that multilateral development banks are a hybrid between the private and the public sector, with a mission to still make profit because they're a bank and they need to be financially sustainable on the long term. But their main mission is to pursue the development interest of the public sector. So we looked at the need, why these multilateral development banks have been created in the first place, and we looked at the money, where this money is coming from. We understand they're coming from the governments which founded these banks. Now let's look at the purpose. Why even do this in the first place? And we're going to base our claims on their founding articles of agreement. Because of course there can be multiple reasons for which a country decides to get involved into such institutions. Is it for collective interest? Is it for self-interest? Do we want to save the world? Do we want to save ourselves? We're not going to get into the topic now. So we're going to trust the articles of agreement. The purpose of multilateral development banks is to provide long-term financing, aka money that you can repay over multiple years at lower interest rates that will be used by those governments to finance the development of infrastructure projects that they need. So it's not charity, it's not free money, it's long-term financing to help governments finance their long-term vision for economic development and growth. What is this vision in practical terms? These are documents you can usually find online that will synthesize the view of a country about where they're headed towards, usually for periods up to 25 years. So if you're looking at most of the countries these days, they were going to have a 2030 development vision and a 2050 agenda. Because as humans, we love planning, and without a vision, you can never really achieve the objectives you want to achieve. Even simpler terms, these development agendas look like long-term New Year resolutions, but applied to governments. So we looked at the simple formula that I proposed to you at the beginning to understand this industry. Needs, money, purpose. Now, the next logic question is, who are the players of this industry? If we want to sound intelligent and use industry jargon, we call them stakeholders. Why stakeholders? Because they hold a stake in this industry. They have an interest and they're looking to achieve something. What's the first player you have in your mind? Of course, it's the government. The government who wants to build an infrastructure project, but also the government who has contributed funds to become a member of this multilateral development bank because they're earning something by being a member of this community. Second, the multilateral development banks themselves. Let us call them all out. The World Bank, ADB, Asian Development Bank, AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AfDB, African Development Bank, IDB, Inter-American Development Bank, and the newest one, MDB, the New Development Bank, with the governments who need the money and the multilateral development banks providing this money for infrastructure projects and making sure the development mission is attached to it. We have other financial players interested in infrastructure assets, pension funds, trust funds, asset managers, and private banks, specific United Nations institutions. Moving on, can you guess who else is interested in development finance? There is an entire community of consulting companies and individual consultants working in this industry because everything related to infrastructure is needed, from engineering consulting, environmental and social safeguards consulting, procurement consulting, but even more, the contractors, the companies which we're actually going to build these infrastructure assets. And finally, maybe you are not thinking about them, but communities, the people whose life is actually impacted, hopefully in a positive way, who need to be active participants throughout the process of the construction of this infrastructure asset. As a multilateral development bank and as someone working in this industry, you need to be aware of the stakes for all these participants before even granting the loan or a financial instrument. Not because you're afraid of not recovering the money, but because your purpose as an institution is to turn money into real assets with a real impact and not have it wasted or stolen through corruption. Let's look at a real example. Imagine you're a farmer working in the most productive area of the country. You're waking up every day at 4 a.m. You load your veggies on a truck and drive for 3 hours to get to the nearby market on a broken road. Imagine 50% of your veggies get broken by the time you get to the market. Your kids spend hours commuting to the nearby school, and ambulances might have real difficulties in even accessing the area you're living in. And let's add another layer of problem. Imagine that for 6 months, this road becomes inaccessible because of flooding. Great. Now it's hard to make private banks care about these farmers in the countryside and talk about a return on investment. But the government knows that by upgrading this road, transport time to the market drops. Suddenly, the farmer is capable of taking his entire produce to the market. Kids get to school faster. And suddenly, different businesses hop along the road. Better economic opportunities can turn into better lifestyle and, may I say, reduces insecurity. So government, part of a multilateral development bank, can simply send a request for financing for this road they identify as a critical missing piece of infrastructure. And most likely, an MDB will come with the money and with the expertise to support the government to first think about the road, find the best design, and finance the adequate infrastructure components. But also at the same time, think about what are all the opportunities to improve the lives of the people living around that infrastructure asset. But here are some misconceptions. No, this job is not glamorous. No, we won't be just giving speeches about poverty reduction. No, we don't just give away free money and expect things to happen. And finally, what personally kills me as a young professional is that no, these projects won't move fast. But once you start to understand all the realities involved in this process, it all becomes much clearer and easier to accept the fact that you're not going to change the world overnight. The reality is much more human and it's messy in the sense that there is so much to coordinate. There are so many stakeholders to consult and so many papers to look at to ensure the right framework for this money to flow into the infrastructure project. And finally, it's political, because where you have governments and money, you have interest and power, period. So it's true, sometimes it might take years, for sure, to disburse even $1, and yet the impact is real. When you travel on a mission, like I'm doing these days, and you meet the people who benefit from the project you're financing, you finally understand. I personally met a woman who would travel only 15 minutes instead of 2 hours to commute to the nearby hospital due to the improvement in patient management enabled by a digital infrastructure project. So that's why people stay in this industry, even when it's slow and complicated, because once you see the impact of your work, it's very hard to unsee it. And you can read about all of these projects because most of it is public information available on the websites of all these multilateral development banks. They're called project documents, and you can go through these hundreds of pages and understand the project from inception to implementation and even to evaluation, where they're looking at the real impact indicators, what the projects actually achieve. So this is development finance in real terms, an industry built on collaboration, patience, nerves, frustration, and a lot of coffee. But if you really want to understand how this industry works, you need to understand the institutions behind it. Because who actually makes these billion-dollar decisions? Who works in this bank? And how does a typical day in this job looks like? And that's what we're going to talk about in episode 2. What is a multilateral development bank and who are the people working inside it? What are the different types of roles you would expect? And how could you one day work in this industry? I hope you found this episode interesting. All your questions. I'm trying to humanize this industry because it's all about our world. And honestly, despite all the disadvantages and all the frustrations and everything that you can criticize this industry for, I really think the job we're doing is really full of meaning, and I want more people to know about it so they can make an informed decision about what sort of career they want to build. See you next time!